Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I received some requests to make a gouache tutorial, so this is gonna be my first real-time video with me explaining my process and talking about the supplies and paints and brushes that I use. So starting with the setup, this is usually all the supplies that I use. So for my mixing palette, I use just this Artist Loft mixing palette. Comes in 40 shades. And for my oil painting, I prefer using a gray palette, but for gouache I don't really care that much, so I just use a white palette. And this is very convenient because you can just throw away these sheets after you're done with mixing. Another alternative that I use sometimes is just a regular ceramic plate. And I've been using this one for a while, but then over the time I just got too tired cleaning it up every time, or sometimes I would leave the paint and I'll think I'll come back to it and finish something with my next painting, but I never end up using it, this paint, and it just dries up, so it doesn't make any sense. But this is something you can use too, just a regular ceramic plate. So for the brushes, I use craft brushes that you can get from Michael's or Hobby Lobby or even Walmart. These are just like a value packs that you get for $5 or something when you can have about 20 brushes. And the reason I like these is because they're actually stiffer than the natural hair brushes. These are all nylon synthetic. And for the way I use gouache, this is more convenient for me, and I'll explain why as I paint. For my paints, these are all the paints that I own, and I mainly use 3 brands. Yeah, I only have 3 brands. So I have Da Vinci, I have Winsor Newton Designer's Gouache, and I have Royal Talents. And there's no real preference in terms of what color I buy from what brand. I was just basically going with sales, to be honest, and just trying to experiment with different colors. So this is fairly limited color palette. I have some reds and earth colors, but for today's painting, it's probably not going to use all of them. So for my water, I just have this little jar of water, and you will see that I'm not going to be using this actually as much. I mainly clean my brush with paper towels, so I'm gonna have my paper towel ready here, and I have a spray bottle to spray my palette, my mixing area, my mixing area of the palette. And I'm gonna post a picture that I'm gonna paint from. I'm using my moleskine watercolor sketchbook. I just started it. I only did so far one painting, one sketch. You can see here, and I will link the video to it in the description below. So the picture that I found is from the website unsplash.com, and they have a good variety of royalty-free images with all kinds of subject matter, so you can either paint from mine, you can go find one of your... Oh, actually, before I mark with a tape, I'm gonna do a little sketch, just a thumbnail sketch, because I'm not gonna paint this exact picture. I like the mountain, the way the lighting works in the mountain and the snow, but I wanna change the foreground a little bit. So I'm just using my 2B pencil to do a little thumbnail sketch. Just to get the basic composition. And on the foreground, I'm thinking how to separate these hills a little bit and maybe put some water between them, maybe. I don't know. Maybe like this. I hope you can see it. So that's what I usually like to do. I find a picture and I mostly use it just for reference. Okay. I'm gonna mark my painting area, the washi tape, because I'm not using the entire page. This helps me to style my composition better, so that I can see the proportions of my painting area. Well, that's about it. And I like to get everything ready before I start putting my paint on the palette, just so it doesn't dry in the meantime. So I just take my bottle and I will spray my palette, not too much, just a little bit. And I'll start laying out my paint. I always start from lighter colors and go to darker colors. I'm gonna need more of the white, and I like to buy white in larger tubes. Oops, lighting on. And I like to buy white in larger tubes, just because you go through white a lot. Next is my lemon yellow, and I'm gonna list all the colors in the description. Or maybe too much. That's okay. Next is Permanent Yellow Deep by Winsor Newton. This is looking a lot like cadmium yellow. Another interesting color I use for my landscapes is Flash Tint by Winsor Newton, and I really like incorporating this color in the mountains. Okay, next is my Burnt Sienna, and I need to buy yellow ochre. I don't know how I've been managing so far without yellow ochre, because in my oil paintings it's probably the #1 paint that I use the most. Well, one thing I like about Winsor Newton paints is that, just like with their oil paints, it's driving me crazy putting their caps back on. They just don't want to go back on. If you don't put it properly, it's just gonna, okay, whatever. If you don't put it properly, it's just gonna dry up. I don't have time for that right now. The next one, I'm gonna use tiny bit of my red, and this is Spectrum Red. It actually looks a lot of like cadmium red deep, very warm and rich red. Next one is my Lilac by Royal Talens, and again this is a pretty color to use for the mountains, and you'll see that in a minute. Next one is my green. This is Sap Green by Da Vinci. Since I'm doing a lot of landscapes, I also like to buy it in larger tubes. Please excuse my cat. chickens meowing in the background. For my blue, I use Prussian blue, and I got this color just to try it out and ended up using this for pretty much every painting that I make. So this is the only blue that I own. It's pretty versatile. And the last one is black. And gouache is probably the only medium where I use black. I don't paint with black in watercolors or oils. But in gouache, it helps me to neutralize my colors sometimes. So I think this is it for now. If I need anything else, I'll add it later. And I'll just spray one more time on top of my fresh paint. Oops. Okay. Now I'll start sketching with my horizon line. And I usually put it on lower third. Yeah, that's very good. I don't worry too much about keeping the exact proportion of the painting, of the photograph for the painting. I just use it for the color reference and the general sort of shapes. But I don't stress over it too much. Once I start painting, I usually like to go with the flow and just see how it goes. So I've decided to separate these hills a little bit, and we're gonna put some water in here. And maybe I'll put a tree in there and some trees here. We'll see how that goes. I'll put some stones in there too. I have to be honest, when I paint, I enjoy it more when I incorporate some of my own ideas into the painting and don't just copy photograph. So I will start with a larger brush. Flat brush is my favorite for painting because you can get a very nice edge on it. And the way I use gouache paint is very similar to the way I use my oils, in which I don't water it down too much. I like it to have a sort of pasty consistency. And I'm starting with the color for my sky. Looks good. So far this is just Prussian blue and white. But if you have cerulean blue, it's going to be even better for your sky. So you see, this is pretty thick paint. Oh, this is even too dark. So instead of cleaning my brush with water, I just like to wipe it off so I don't put too much water into my brush and don't compromise the texture of my paint. So we're just gonna go a little lighter the colors. Right now, when you're painting against the white of the paper, everything is gonna look like it's too dark. But as you're gonna keep painting and adding more colors, it's all gonna make sense. So you see, I'm not doing this as a watercolor wash. I'm rather just applying this like soft butter. And it's okay if you have some lighter, darker areas. Sort of some suggestion of clouds. And even it gets a little bit more white. And as you can see, I don't blend too much. If I don't like a color, I can just cover it up on top. Wipe it again. Wait, I think this is too bright. Okay. And you can see already that my sky is going to be much lighter than the sky in the picture. And whenever you paint from a picture, you have to keep in mind that on a photograph, the sky tends to be much darker than in real life. Because the camera compensates for the general exposure that you have in your picture. And actually in this photograph, we even have some vignetting going on. So now, because I'm going to be painting the mountain, which is a warmer color, I am going to clean my brush in water so I don't put too much of this cool color. And when I paint my mountains, I like to have some contrast going on between light and dark. And depending of which I have more of the light or the dark, that's the color I start with. So we see more of the sunlit area on this mountain, I would say. So I'm gonna start with my flesh tone, pinky color. And we'll add some yellow. And the way I'm explained is pretty intuitive, but I would say that it just developed with all of the paint mixing that I've done over the years in watercolors and oils. I know my paints, I know my pigments, and I know which color I'm gonna get if I mix these particular pigments. So this would be my sunlit area, the mountain, but I'm gonna cool it down just a little bit, but not too much. So I'm gonna put a little bit of my violet in it, just so it's not too orangey. And of course, it's always gonna look different on the palette than on paper. So we can test it out. Yeah, this is good. I'm just gonna go over the edge. I don't worry too much about where my snow is gonna go. I think that this needs to be lighter just a little bit. Add a little bit of white and yellow. The white neutralizes your paint a little too much. So if you want to keep some of your saturation, you just need to add a little bit of color back. So that's why when I lighten up color with white, I add just a tiny bit of yellow to it. So I don't worry too much about where my snow is gonna go right now. I can always paint on top of it because gouache just dries so fast. And the mountain in the back is not gonna have this much saturation, so I'm adding a little more white and picking up a little bit of this blue that I have over here, and this mountain is going to be a little lighter in value and also have a little less contrast going on. So now I'm gonna, and you see again, I'm just wiping this with paper towel, I'm not using too much water. Now I'm gonna mix my shade color, and I will use some of the blue that I already mixed. It's already dry enough, so I'll spray a little bit more water. And you see that our blue has a purple tone to it because this is the either sunset or sunrise, and the sun is much warmer at these times, so your shadows are not going to be as cool as you get in midday. So I'm using my blue color, which I mixed for the sky. That was just too dark for me. That's what I started from. And I'm putting some of the violet and a little bit of red in lilac. It's lilac color. And let's see how it goes. This is actually not too bad. I'm using this a little bit thinner. You'll see that there's a little more water in this mixture, and that is primarily because just the way I started working oils. I sort of like to preserve thicker paints for highlights because they attract more attention. As you can see, there is a lot of back and forth going on between the colors. Just trying to see what works and what's best for the painting. And the sun is setting, so we're only gonna have the top of the mountain. In the sun. The bottom is going to be in the shadow. And in some areas I just use almost a dry brush just to get some of the details. And for this mountain in the back, I'm gonna lighten up my blue color a little bit. Once again, it's further away. Just sort of going on around this transition area where my shadow transitions into the highlight, and adding a little bit of the in-between color. Just so I don't have such a drastic change between light and shadow. Now I'm gonna clean up my brush a little bit, just because I have too much paint in there at this point. So I'm not trying to get the exact likeness of this mountain. I just do whatever works for the painting. Now, let's see if this is, yeah, this is dry. I'm gonna go over the snow. And because this is sunset or sunrise, we don't know, the snow which is in the highlight is not gonna be perfectly white. It's gonna be a little bit warmer tone, so I'm mixing in some of this in my beige mixture that I have here to use for the mountain, and I put a little bit of yellow into it, but still it has to be pretty light. And I'm first gonna go over the highlighted part. Just taking a little bit of water to wet my brush. It's drying up way too fast. And this is one of the reasons why I like gouache, because I tend to paint very slow with oils. I just really take my time with them. And I would like to learn how to paint fast. I would like to speed up my process. And that's what I'm sort of forced to do with gouache. I know that I have to paint fast before it dries. some areas I also add a little bit of this dry brush effect. Okay, so we got our highlights now, and now I'm gonna put some snow in the shadow. And the nice part about this more professional paint, fortunately it's more expensive, but you can go back and re-evat it, so you don't waste any paint that you already have on the palette. I'm adding a little more purple to my mixture. Okay, that should be good. I'll go over a little bit of the snow that I already have and just push some of it in the shadow to add some dimension to it. Just keep in mind the direction of the light, and other than that you can pretty much do whatever you want with the snow. The placement is not really that important. Now I'm gonna put some snow on the hills right here. The dry brush effect, when you don't have as much paint on your brush or your paint is almost dry, helps you add sort of a variety of texture. As you can see, I don't leave necessarily the marks of the brush strokes, but rather these random bits and pieces that sort of help create this more natural texture. I'm just gonna wet my brush a little bit to pick up this lighter paint for my shadows here. This mountain. And that's about it, I think. I only want to go over this top area a little more. Let's see. I'm using more of my pure whites this time. Just want to give more contrast to this area. Okay. Okay, now I'm gonna put this mid-ground hill that we have on the right, and I think I can spray my paints again. Starting to dry. And this hill is all in the shadow, and it also has more greenery on it. So I'm starting with my sap green. I'll add a little bit of black and blue to it. It's my cat. He likes to sit in the studio with me when I work. So I'm gonna neutralize this a little bit with red. Yeah, he's very vocal. I neutralize it with red a little bit because first of all, this is still the midground, it's not the foreground. You want to have your highest saturation vibrancy in the foreground. So we want to create some difference between the background and the foreground. So that's why I'm desaturating this a little bit. So I used sap green, my Prussian blue, my black, my little bit of burnt sienna, and red. And I'm just gonna go over this area a little bit. One thing you can do, which is something I forgot to do, is you can do the underpainting or toning your paper just like you would do in acrylics or in oils, and that helps to harmonize your colors but also give you some sort of a base tone. And then when you go over it, you can leave some of that color showing through, and it just adds an interest to it. So I'm gonna put some indications of the trees up on a hill with the tip of my brush. And this is one of the reasons why I like my flat brush, because you can create very nice points with it. And I mixed in a little bit of burnt sienna in there just so I have some variation going on. It's not just a green hill. Maybe we have some grass, maybe some sand. And now the beach area. I'll put some sand there. And just go over it a little bit, just to add some detail so it's not too boring. Remember that in gouache, lighter colors dry darker and darker colors dry lighter. So your darker colors might not be as dark, and you'll find that you don't have as much definition in the shadows. But I usually like to give my colors a chance to dry a little bit before I make any changes. And I already see that I want to push it even a little further with the shadow. So I'm mixing a little bit more of my blue and black into my green mixture. And I'm gonna go over a little bit more. And I basically just doing some scribble scrabble, what my son would call it, to put some indications of individual trees and some texture. Because honestly, the less you care about putting each individual thing and rather concentrate on your composition and your color and your value, the more natural it's gonna look. put some trees up in there on the shore, on the shoreline. Okay. We can move on to our water. So with the water, I'm basically gonna improvise because we don't have the water on the picture. So I'm gonna use my Prussian blue. I'm gonna use my white. And remember that all of our water is gonna be in the shadow. So it's gonna be fairly dark. Use a little bit of green. And this is actually looking very nice. It's sort of a turquoise mountain lake. So let's see how that looks. Oh, that's not too bad. This is gonna be my base color, and I'm gonna go over it with darker color for shadows and lighter colors for reflections and for some ripples on the water. And when I paint water, I like to go in sort of horizontal direction because it helps me to recreate the texture of the water better. Okay, now I'm gonna add a little bit of this purple color to sort of show some reflections of the mountain. And when you mix color, remember to get the remaining color of previous color from your brush out, so you see exactly what your color is going to look like, because once you start painting on the paper, it might start looking different because all of the color is going to start coming out of your brush and you'll have no idea why does it look different. So I'm just putting a little bit of this purple color, and now I'm going to start going for this lighter. I want some more white. Sort of to mimic the reflections. And I'm going to try to be very realistic, just as long as it looks somewhat believable. And again, the dry brush is another good way to show sort of these ripples in the water. Just drag it across, and then we have to put some of these reflections of this hill that we have here. So I'm mixing back my color that I used for the greenery there, but I'm mixing in some of my watercolor, because the color of the water, I mean, because this is the reflection that we see. So it's not going to be the exact color, just sort of a darker shade. Okay, sort of like that. foreground, we can mix a little bit of the warmer mixture for our greenery. To bring it even closer, because usually the colors that are in a distance, they look somewhat cooler. This is way too watery. There's too much water. And whenever I paint grass, I just use variation of textures and colors. But I don't worry too much about details. I'm using some of my sap green and my Prussian blue. Oh, this is too much paint. My sap green and my Prussian blue. A little bit of black saturated and darken it. That will be my shadow. And I'm just going over with different colors just to have something interesting going on, so it's not just one plain color of the grass. For the stones, at this point I stopped following my reference pictures. Usually closer to the end of the painting, I stop looking at the reference picture and I just look at my painting and trying to figure out what works for my painting right now. So, drop some water. Just trying to figure out what works for my painting at this moment. So I'm gonna be adding some smaller stones, and I'm using my phthalo blue, my lilac, some red, and I'm just basically trying to mix a warm gray color I use black to mix black and white to mix gray color because I like my grays to have some color to them. I need more white. I need a fresh piece of paper too. Cool it down a little bit. And when you're mixing gray colors, it's actually pretty easy. You just use your, because for example right now this looks very greenish to me, so I'm gonna use a little bit of red to desaturate this a little bit, because you can just use your complementary colors to mix. And here I'm just mixing some highlight. You can use just your complementary colors to mix your grays. So I'm just gonna go and add some this basic color for my stones. And I'm just improvising. I'm just trying to visualize how would they look. And I'm going with my mid-tone. So now I can use some more blue and a little bit of black, a little bit of red. This will be my shadow. This is becoming too big for me, this brush. I'm actually going to use another smaller lead brush. Or just a little bit of the highlight. This part, this hill is pretty much all in the shadow, so we're not going to have too much contrast going on. Just a little bit. And now I can go over my grass once again and cover the rocks in some areas. Okay, so I think I want to add a tree. An evergreen in here just to have something else going on in that area. So I'm starting with my sap green, my blue, and my black. And that will be my basic shadow color. And when I paint trees, I don't paint each sort of single branch, or leaf, or needle in this case. I just create these sort of random brush strokes, and it looks just way more natural than if you were really trying to get each of the details right. And just remember that nature doesn't have really perfect shapes. It's not necessarily always triangular shape. There's a lot more variety going on. You don't always go from the larger branch on the bottom to the smaller branch on top. Sometimes it's different. Sometimes you have a larger branch on top, smaller on the bottom, then again larger and again smaller. I'll just put some more trees in there. So I usually start with a trunk, and then I turn my brush horizontally, and then I start tapping it, going in random directions. And your main goal with the trees is to basically get the recognizable pattern of the tree without too much repetition, so that you're not painting all the trees the same. They sort of have the same pattern, but they're different. Each tree is a little bit unique in its own way. Alright, and I'm going to put another one here. Since I left that area blank, because I was thinking, let's make this one higher. And another thing you want to avoid, or at least pay attention to when you're painting trees, is not to make them all the same height, because again, that's gonna look very unnatural. And now I'm gonna mix a little bit of my yellow with my green, and because our taller tree is so tall, we can add a little bit of indication of the sunlight hitting it. And maybe on this one here, just a little bit on the top. And now I'm just gonna mix some of my sap green and my blue, just a tiny bit of white and yellow, just for the highlights on the rest of the tree, so they don't look too dark. And again, I'm just going on sort of random strokes. And you want to keep your midtones cooler than the highlights, so that you have a better contrast between this shadow area and the sunlit area on top. And I can even go over some of these trees a little bit. Just to add some more different. You know what? You can even add a little bit of highlights just to the tip of this mountain. So I'm mixing my warmer green. I usually tend to use the cadmium yellow rather than lemon yellow, but lemon yellow is still very useful in some cases. So I'm just gonna light up this area a little bit. Add some lighter spots on the tree here too, because it's gonna dry lighter. Okay, I think that's about it. So this is my little landscape. This is my favorite part. Now you can varnish your gouache paintings. It's gonna add a little bit more richness to the color because it's gonna bring back sort of the darks. I don't usually varnish, plus this is just a sketchbook. And that's it for today's tutorial. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. If you have any other questions, leave them in the comment section below and I'll answer in my next tutorial. So please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!